Meta piles on, and questioning Tim Sweeney's thinking. This is MacVoices. Today's MacVoices is supported by Clean My Mac Business. Try 14 days free for up to 30 devices at cleanmy.com/MacVoices Clean My Mac Business. That's CLMMY.com/MacVoices Clean My Mac Business.
A lot of my comments were, I've seen a lot of commentary online that, it's a new world, everything's going to change. And that's sort of what my comment was. I don't think things are going to change that much. A little bit around the edges, but I don't think it's going to be a major change for the overall market, at least not initially, not just from this. I think there'll have to be more. And I also think that still feels like a win for Apple, I think. The judge didn't say, you have to give back the billions of dollars you took in this, with this scheme over the last 5 years. It's like, hey, they're laughing all the way to the bank. Maybe they won't be able to get that going forward, at least from Spotify and some other customers like that. But the judge didn't say you have to give back the money you took. He didn't. There's no penalty imposed. I mean, maybe I'll believe it when I see it, but maybe this one guy will face perjury charges. I doubt it, but maybe. But that's just one guy, and I think outside of the Apple, I don't know what you call it, blogosphere or whatever. Ordinary customers, they don't even heard about this. And, nobody's going to go and say like, oh yeah, I'm going to go buy a Galaxy phone because the judge smacked down Apple. No one's going to do that.
Yeah. Dave, you want in?
Yeah, just real quick to camp on to Jim's comment. You're right. I mean, we as Apple pundits, we're going to be talking about this for weeks. Like you just said, Chuck, the normal Apple consumer doesn't really care about this very much. Even with the fact that a lot of these other app developers I've already read about Spotify, I read about Patreon, all these others that are going to go into their own app store center and not have to pay that 30% to Apple anymore. We're going to start seeing more and more of these app developers are going to start doing that because now it's open. Apple has to abide by it. You think Apple isn't going to stop it? So where do we go from here? We'll see what happens.
I'm glad you both brought up Patreon because MacVoices does have a Patreon account, and we've talked about this before. That if you go to the Patreon website, Apple doesn't take 30% because you're not going through the iOS app. But if you go through the iOS app, they have been taking 30%. So that means that 30% of every dollar that you might contribute to help support MacVoices was going to Apple. If you went through that particular channel, if you went through the other channel, it wasn't. So that was one of those weird things. And, they were saying, well, if you're a Patreon person, you can encourage people to go to the website. Well, frankly, I never encouraged anybody to go to the app before or after this. It's just whatever is most convenient for you if you decide you want to help support the show, and we'll, worry about the rest later. So that's been interesting to see just how that goes. I can completely understand why Patreon did it. I absolutely understand why Spotify did it. Sure. Little surprised that some of the others haven't done it quite yet and quite so aggressively. And I am thinking about the big guys like Adobe, because there has to be a lot of money at stake there for them.
Adobe doesn't sell content; they sell software.
Okay, that's true.
Mm-hmm. Although there is a 40% deal right now.
Situation doesn't that just doesn't this just put Patreon back to where they were about a year and a half ago?
Well, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Apple wasn't collecting, and then Apple's like, hey, that's our money. Give us our money.
Right.
And, so now this is just sort of reverting that back to the way it was. But yeah, from what I can see, this doesn't change things for Adobe or Microsoft or ProView development. I don't think it is a change for that.
I don't know. Well, again, we're going to see,
But
have
we'll
to see how
see.
it goes. Yeah.
I think this is, like I say, I'm mostly just responding to, I've seen so many people online saying, "Oh, this changes everything." Like, does it? It changes a few things. Like Patreon goes back to the way they were for a while in the United States only. Hey, if you're a yoga instructor in Canada, yeah, you're still got to pay Apple.
So we don't just keep going round and round on this. But Eric, I want to give you the last word because you said that you want to see how this affects Patreon content producers.
Yeah, the if the tax that Patreon's paying gets removed or reduced, then hopefully content producers get more out of what's being contributed. It's not that unlike the whole question of what's going on with tariffs in this country, and what gets shipped and what doesn't. Less of the extra tax, I think, is beneficial. More content producers get more options, and Patreon has always been kind of a convenient interface for users. It would be nice if the content producers got more of what they really deserve to get for producing the content.
Eric, I sorry, I got to do it. Because I'm one of those content producers, but I recognize that Patreon has built an app, and of course, let's not forget that Patreon is making money off of this deal too.
Mm-hmm.
They take a cut of anything that anybody contributes to any show or any project supported by Patreon. So there is a little bit of self-interest there going, but at the end of the day, they make it easier for somebody to become a Patreon subscriber right from their phone.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to having to jump off and go and create an account on the website and go jump through all those hoops. So that's why I guess I come back to it in every case, that the reason that these companies are making money is off the convenience and the platform that Apple has built.
Well, and that hasn't changed. If you buy Patreon through an in-app purchase, Apple's still going to get their cut. The judge didn't say that wasn't the case. All the judge said was, what Apple's been saying is, even if you go to the website, you've still got to pay Apple. In fact, essentially, Apple's going to get more money than if you went through in-app purchase.
Went the other way.
But there's not been any change. If you go through Apple's in-app purchase, then Apple's going to get paid. So, the thing was that before Apple said, they made it really difficult for you to tell somebody that you could go to the website. And they also said, hey, if somebody goes to the website, you've got to track the fact that they clicked on that link, and then you've got to give us 27% of your revenue.
On the phone, if they did all that on the phone.
No. If somebody in the app clicked and went to the website, then you're supposed to account for that and send Apple a check. That's been the rules for the last 4 years.
I don't know about that because
that's what this whole argument has been about.
If I go to the Patreon website in Safari on my Mac, it has no way of knowing whether I am that transaction, as I've understood it, is between me and Patreon.
If you click on, if you're in the app and you click on the take me, I want to hear, I want to buy this through the web, and you click the thing. Okay, like if you know to go to Safari on your own, but if you go in and click, there's a button in the app, and then it comes up with a big scare screen that says, hey, you're going to an external site, and Apple doesn't, and Apple prescribed exactly what that screen had to say. But not only that, if a customer did that, then you, being Patreon or whatever, not the content creator, the software maker, was obliged to account for that. And if the customer then made the purchase within 7 days, Patreon had to pay Apple.
If all that was done on the phone or an iPad.
No, all the person did was click a link saying, "Take me to Safari," and
Right.
the rest of it was all done
Chuck,
in Safari.
Chuck,
Jeff,
I think it would be clearer from your side, instead of saying from the iPhone or from the iPad, to say from the app. So if you
Okay.
clicked a link in the app on whatever device to go
Right.
outside the app to a website to pay, that would kick in the 30% or 27 or whatever percent fee that Apple expected to get back. If you go to the website without starting in the app, that doesn't get tracked.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. That was, you said it much more eloquently than I did. And so, yes, and Jim's right, based on Jeff's comments, yes. But if you went cold to Patreon, the patreon.com website, did not click on the Patreon, the link in the Patreon app, if you just went there, then that's a transaction between you and Patreon and no one else.
Correct.
Right,
Yes.
but basically, Apple's saying, we get a finder's fee of 27%.
Finder's fee, facilitation fee, I don't care what you call it.
Well,
I mean,
the judge
yes.
calls it fraud, and or he calls it, she calls it, defying my order. That's what she called it.
Well, that's what she calls it, but she's only a judge.
Exactly, and we don't think much of judges these days in our society.
Steve in the chat room says, because he made a comment I didn't quite follow, the author sells the program directly to the end user for much less than the retail price would have been through all of the middlemen to a store. And that's a very fair point. But Steve, I guess in some cases, and believe me, I do not believe in all cases. In some cases, those middlemen add value to the product. So that's where Apple sits. Apple adds the value, and in my mind, Apple adds the value of making sure that the app is secure, of giving the app a place to live so that people can find it. And that gets into a discovery issue we don't want to go down. But there are services that Apple provides in exchange for that 30%, 27%, whatever, or whatever it ends up being.
But those services aren't optional. So look at the Macintosh. Mac has a Mac App Store, and they charge 30% or 15% in some situations. And nobody says, boo, because developers can choose whether to do that or not. They can also sell directly to the customer. That's, their choice. So if a developer looks and says, "Oh yeah, this is great. I love, the value I'm getting, from, that Apple's providing," that's great. The thing is, on iOS devices, Apple is saying it's our way or the highway. You don't have a choice. You have to pay us 30% in order to have access to these customers. Full stop.
We're going to move on from this because, again, we're going to be talking about it for a long time. And, I love the fact that we don't all agree on this. So we'll just continue to not agree as we see what the appeal brings. So moving on from it, and I lost the next article. Good for me. Oh, yes. Okay. So you talk about piling on. While all this was happening, Meta decides to jump into the fray and start fighting with Apple over platform power and developer freedom, according to Apple Insider. And I pointed out just because this seemed to be so Zuckerberg-like. And this is from our friend Andrew Orr, wrote this up over on Apple Insider. And I don't know what to say to that, except, it just says, according to Zuckerberg, Apple basically said you can't have a platform within a platform because of Facebook's in-app games. And I just, Zuckerberg is Zuckerberg.
Well, sure. He's like, hey, your monopoly is interfering with our attempt to make a monopoly.
Yeah.
This edition of MacVoices is supported by Clean My Mac Business. Try 14 days free for up to 30 devices at cleanmy.com/MacVoices Clean My Mac Business. Finally, Clean My Mac has come to the enterprise market. Clean My Mac Business was designed for SMBs looking to maintain all Macs like one. Disk cleaning, malware protection, patch management, and security compliance, all within a single dashboard. There's so much it can do for you. Disk Cleaner can remove clutter that consumes free space on your team's Macs, eliminate app leftovers, and unwanted caches. Malware Protection identifies malicious agents and secures your Mac with Moonlock's malware monitoring and protection. Patch Management monitors apps and their versions, helps users stay updated and protected with recent patches. Application Management monitors the apps installed on your team's computers and initiates patch updates. Clean My Mac Business is easy to get started with and perfect for scaling. Begin with as little as 6 devices and expand as your team grows. They've got a plan for every Mac fleet, no matter the industry or the size. Try Clean My Mac Business for 14 days free for up to 30 devices at cleanmy.com/MacVoices Clean My Mac Business. That's clnmy.com/MacVoices Clean My Mac Business. Thanks to Clean My Mac Business for supporting MacVoices.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, Jim, thank you very much for the segue. Lex Friedman does a terrific podcast. He gets some amazing guests, and his conversations go anywhere from 4 to 8 hours. And I am not exaggerating. So you either really have to want to hear from the person in depth, or you use it to put yourself to sleep. That said, Lex is a great interviewer, and I have a huge amount of respect for him. He recently had Tim Sweeney on, and I put a link in the show notes to this. If you want to listen to the whole thing, great. It's over 4 hours long. But if you want to just use the chapter markers, you can jump in, and there's about 20 to 25 minutes where they address the Apple situation and Epic's idea of what fairness is and what their thoughts are on everything we've been talking about. And Jim, just what you said, when I listened to it, it felt like this guy is so disingenuous because he's criticizing Apple and he wants to do the exact same thing, just maybe with some lower numbers. And also he's the one that, helped kind of orchestrate this whole thing. And allegedly he's made an offer to Apple that they will cancel all legal actions if I just put Fortnite back in the App Store. And to my knowledge, it's not there yet. Mark? Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
Yes, this is interesting. And I would say Lex Friedman, he's a good conversationalist. I don't think he's a particularly good interviewer because in this, he did bring up about 3.5 hours into the interview about the Epic versus Apple fight and how Epic is charging 12% and how Epic has demands for exclusivity, and he let Sweeney just take him and run off. And he did some follow-ups, but he didn't do any probing. It was specifically about, well, why is it 12%? The people at Steam, are now even less as a result of, the actions that you took. Why is this unfair, and why should they have exclusivity? So I think he missed, an opportunity to really provide some insight into, what Sweeney was saying. The interview comes out. I mean, when Sweeney was talking about Apple, it just reminded me of this Don Draper quote, because he was saying way back in the good old Apple II days, everything was open and this, that, and the other thing. And then he sort of mixes, sort of openness to, okay, well, we want companies that, are able to charge. And, he doesn't want Apple to charge him. He seemed morally offended. It was 30%, like if it was 15 or 12%, would that be any better? He went back and forth, but he sounds like a very, very interesting, obviously very smart guy. But again, his motives are really unprobed, other than he doesn't want to pay Apple 15% or 30%, and he has enough money, and enough position that he launched this fight back in, what was it, July or August of 2020, when they slipped out that update and turned on there, buys the stuff from us and not from Apple. And that, that got them kicked out of the App Store. And this fight has been going on and on and on and on since then. But, I'd say for anybody, sort of, when I first saw the interview pop up in my feed, I saw it in like 4.5 hours. I figured, there's no way I want to listen to any of this. So, I sampled a little bits and pieces, and then started talking about history of video games and things. And, I figured, okay, there must be something about Apple in there. And then I fast forward to the end, and I couldn't find it. And you, Chuck, did the service by posting the time codes of where he talked about it. So I went back and listened to it while dog walking. And, it's clear he had a grudge. He's not afraid of going up against Apple Inc. And a lot of the court cases did not go against him. As we said, Apple shot themselves in the kneecap, or the groin or the heart, on this recent thing, because Epic lost, most of the procedure, most of the issues, in their original lawsuit. So, it's interesting. I think you should maybe, when you post this episode, post the time codes, so that people can go straight to those, and spare themselves having to search through a long 4.5 hour, multi-topic, multifaceted, interview.
Yeah, and thank you for pointing that out, Mark, because the website, the web link I put in for the audio, if you scroll down just a little bit, it shows the time codes where they talk about Apple and where they talk about the Epic Store, and those were the two segments that I found the most interesting and the most revealing here. There is. Lex also publishes a video version of it. To be honest with you, I don't know. I think the time codes are there too, because it only makes sense for a 4 hour.
That's how I watched it.
Oh, did you? Okay, good. Thank you, Jim. So it's there if you want to see him, or to listen to the audio version if you just want to listen to him. But I think it is worth the listen, so that you have a little bit more of a balanced perspective on just what he's thinking. It doesn't mean I agree with it. Doesn't mean I have any more respect for him after listening to it. It just feels like he's somebody that's just slightly out of touch, in some ways.
Well, no, I'd say it's nostalgia. He's pining for the good old days when everything was open, and software was written and shared between people for free, and no business or commerce. And like Don Draper said, it's a pain and an aching for the past. So.
No, it's free as long as he gets paid for it.
He makes tons of money off of software. Did you see the part where Lex asked him, why were you the one that challenged Apple? Did you see that part?
I'm sure I did. It didn't register strongly with me.
Well, it did with me. I think he made a really good point, which was we could afford to do it. He threw up a chart, and I think iOS was only like 8% of their business or something. So it's like, basically we could risk this without killing our company, even if Apple kicked us out of the store, which they did. But most software developers, they cannot risk that. If they're kicked out of the store, then they're out of business. And he made the point that developers are terrified of Apple, and I think that is absolutely correct. And that is one reason why you're seeing a lot of glee. And I'm making a gesture with my hands. You can't see it because my camera is not working. But I think a lot of people are like, they're really happy about what the judge said, because they're all thinking this. Apple has been treating us so terribly with absolutely no respect, and so yay judge. But I think that is nobody challenges it, because it's just too risky. It's a extinction level event for almost all software companies. I guess maybe not for like Microsoft, but even there, it's like why it's not worth the risk versus the reward. But there's lots of software developers that would have been happy to pursue this case in court if it wasn't something that would most likely cost them their business. And even like as you say, and he talks about this again, like also the whole thing about Apple gatekeep. I think for a lot of developers, the fact that Apple's a gatekeeper is even a bigger deal than the percentage cut. The fact that Apple can determine whether or not you have a business at all, that they can do things like, oh yeah, we're gonna delay your a bug fix release for months. That happens. So people just live in terror that I think the same thing's true of YouTube content creators. They're afraid of Google. There's I imagine people are afraid of Facebook, that base their business on that. People are probably, Amazon, all these situations where you have large vendors that, control people's lives. They don't want to, rock the boat. Just like, we'll be quiet, go along. But we're not happy, but, publicly, we're not going to say anything.
Right. Marty?
Yeah, I couldn't listen to the interview. I actually started listening to it and got about 2 minutes in it, and I couldn't listen to his voice. So I went directly to the transcript, which actually makes him sound a lot more intelligent than he sounds. And so people who want to not listen and try and follow along, I'd encourage you to go to the transcript and go to the time markers with it. There's a lot that's just kind of disingenuous and he counters some of his own words. He talks about an open platform, but then he talks about exclusivity. And, exclusivity for some of the big products that are going to make money, but the smaller developers, they can go where they want, and it just sounds like it creates a problem. He claims that 30% cut forces the price hikes and bankrupts developers, but it kind of overstates it, and it's rather unsupported. Combines platform fees and marketing costs into junk fees, and again conflates two different aspects of business into one. I think what really got me going was when he started talking about Steam, and I hope Steam was listening or reading, because he makes some accusations about Steam that is just slanderous in a lot of ways. And Steam's got money too, and the possibility of lawsuits. He espouses freedom but limits access, as I said, to kind of exclusive things. Alleges Steam calls developers to block discounts without any evidence presented around that. And then Reddit apparently had a Steam subreddit and referred to that as being toxic. And because some of the things he saw in the subreddit, he didn't like, but it winds up ignoring some of the genuine things that were problems in the subreddit as far as Epic is concerned. So there's just a lot in this article that is unsupported, and maybe the interviewer wanted to just kind of let him go on and hang himself, but for me, he missed opportunities to challenge him on some of this stuff. But that's what media sometimes is today.
I'm glad you heard some of the same things I did, Marty, and interesting that you picked them up from the transcript as opposed to listening. Jeff.
All right. So Epic, what they've wanted all along is what Apple already had. And I don't know if it was one person or a group of people, if it was Tim, doesn't matter. Tim is the face of Epic, so that's close enough. So Tim thinks, hey, Apple's got a really cool thing going on there with their app store. I want that for us. And then it turns out, well, he can't actually do that because of the constraints that the App Store has. So he, or Epic, then decides, all right, we are going to court. We are going to use the legal system to force Apple to allow us to do what we want, which is actually what Apple is already doing. And so that's brought us to where we are today. Tim and Epic, they have said many things that are true, but you can speak truth and still be disingenuous. And I believe Epic has been disingenuous through this whole thing. They have presented their case as if they are a folk hero and they are out here doing this for the good of all developers. And I do not believe for a minute they care about any other developers at all. This is all about they want to create their own gardened app store with exclusivity and fees similar to what Apple has. But they couldn't do that across all platforms because of the restrictions that they have through the App Store. So they've just been leveraging the legal system to get what they want. And developers along the way have gotten on board because they have really played the folk hero card well. And I think there's a lot of people that will continue to be like, yeah, go Epic. This is great. Give us what we really want. And then Epic will give them what Epic wants. And all these people will be like, oh, not like that. So I guess what I'm really doing is soapboxing now because I am not a fan of what's going on here. And it doesn't matter that it's Apple. It's that it's Epic doing this in a disingenuous way.
Dave?
Yeah, and then meanwhile, Tim Sweeney did talk to Business Insider today as we're recording that Epic paid over $100 million in legal bills, but it did cost the company a lot more. But he says that Fortnite could have made over $300 million on iOS, but they projected hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue because of this fight. So I don't see how that is a good idea to be paying these legal fees. I understand why they're in their point, and just to say what Jeff, just to tap on what Jeff said, yeah, this is an ongoing battle. They want to have their own little garden, little apps out store. It just isn't going to happen, and if that's what they think that's a good thing for the company, I mean, it's very interesting.
Marty?
Yeah, I just one last comment that, the big claim about 12%. Epic claims that Apple should be able to do this with 12%. They don't have evidence to justify that. I mean, they say Epic's doing it at 12%, but Epic doesn't have long-term sustainability efforts or records that indicate 12% is all you need. Plus, what Epic wants to produce, although Jeff is, they want a store, but they don't know the cost of the store, and so who's to say 12% or 30%? Apple's argument is 30% is what we determine the market will hold, so that's why we go with 30%.
And to pile on just a little bit here, because we are demonizing Tim Sweeney, and I think maybe with good reason, but maybe not. Maybe you disagree. But number one, the Fortnite store.
Well, if you disagree, you're wrong. But continue.
Thank you, Jeff. But the Fortnite store has nowhere near the volume or the traffic that the Apple App Store does. Fortnite is, I'm sorry, it's just a gaming company, and I know I'm going to upset some people with that. But, look at what Apple does. Apple reaches out to every market that with all the capabilities of the iPhone. So it's not just games, but it's photography and cooking and podcasts. And I mean, you all know, how many different kinds of apps are in the App Store because you have them on your phone and in your iPad. So I think that's a great point, Marty, that, they're talking like what they can do is the way that you do it. And when you start getting to the scale that Apple is, there are costs associated with it that you never even thought about when you were smaller. And I know the Fortnite store is not small, but it's magnitude smaller than Apple's. So again, go listen to the interview. I think it's really worth it. And folks, if you do, and you have agreements, disagreements with any of us, please drop me an email, chuck@macvoices.com, because I'm really interested in how you perceive what's going on between these two companies and how the court is interpreting some of it. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.